So, welcome to the regular meeting of the Tuesday, February 13th, day before Valentine's Day, Wampo meeting. So, again, I'm Pete Meitzner, the current chair. We want to formally welcome some new members due to elections, again, because the policy body is represented by elected representatives of the communities they represent. So want to welcome Cindy Claycomb from the city of Wichita, Brandon Johnson, the alternate for the city of Wichita, Jim, I forgot, Benage. Okay, Jim Benage, welcome. Alternate for the city of Bel Air, Scott Hildebrand, alternate for the city of Valley Center, and Nancy Farber-Matola from the city of Mulvane, and Ron Marsh, alternate for the city of Clearwater. So did I miss anybody? So welcome to being members of the policy body. We did have a workshop that came to a close, and we're calling the meeting to order. The regular business, we have the agenda, which, looking at the agenda based on some discussion, if you look on the back side, item 3D 5, Roman numeral 5. I'd like to consider, because it's about funding project selection criteria changes. I'm not real comfortable that what we just discussed, and I don't think there's a time frame where we have to make that vote today or not. I don't know, Phil, what kind of time do we have?
Put it off till the next meeting.
This is a consent sign. I would move the item D on the 4 to 5
Off of the consent agenda.
off of the consent agenda.
Separate a consent agenda. Okay. There's, and I've done this under the regular business, the agenda. So maybe I'm ahead of it. If we move it, there's been a motion to move that item off of the consent agenda as we get ready to do the agenda. So is there a second on that? Second by Richard, thank you. All in favor of moving that off the consent agenda, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, so with that, we're going to approve or recommend, entertain a motion to approve the February 13th agenda as stated with that exception.
Approve the February agenda with the modification as stated.
Thank you, Bert. Thank you, Claire. Any discussion? Being none, there's a motion and approval motion and a second to approve the agenda. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, motion carries. Next is the approval of the December 12th minutes. If you've had a chance, you all got a copy of them, chance to review them. Any changes or comments? Being none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Make a motion to approve December 12th, 2017 minutes.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Dan. Motion and a second to approve the minutes. Being no discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, motion carries. Next item is the director's report, an update from Tricia Thomas. There we go. Hey, Tricia, how are you? Welcome. This is.
Hi, guys. So I'm going to give you an update on our public participation plan. So about a year ago this time, we approved our public participation plan. And I don't have any slides, and I'll keep it brief, but you have 2 handouts at your spots. So this is what we're going to talk about. So we got this new plan about a year ago, and at that time I presented to you, I also committed to come back to you to tell you how it's been going. So we've got this handout, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the public outreach activities that have been going on since we last talked and answer that question. So if you look at this first page, it's got the 2017 on it, you'll see on the front page showing some of our web traffic, and I just want to draw your attention to the tiny fine print at the bottom. So 2016, we only had a partial year data, so what I basically did was multiplied by 2, assuming that we'd be no more, no less than that half a year's data, just so that we have some comparison here. And I want to draw your attention specifically to the number of visits here. So this will show the number of people. And I put a little rule of thumb down below that shows the relationship between these measures. So basically, on average, one visit may generate 3 views and 45 hits. So the hits are anytime someone downloads an image or interacts with this graphic content. So really, that visits measure is the most important to look at. And as we compare last year, it looks like we're getting more attention on our website. So that's a good thing. Our Twitter, it looks like my goal was to have a weekly Twitter post. So I think I met that mostly. And our impressions, these are tweets that generate actions or comments. Those went down from 2016, and I think it's because our bike head count, we had a volunteer photo contest that was very social media driven, and so we had a lot of activity on Twitter in 2016. So that explains why that occurred. If we flip over to the back, we can see Facebook. These are actual numbers. I tried to define some of the measures here for you. I won't read them, but basically, this picture looks good. The engaged number, or the actual number of people that were reached through our posts, and it may look low, but when you see these high numbers of things that went viral and things that are reached, this means that these 387 people shared this and other people saw it and shared it. So it's good that we see there's a high number, because it means people are seeing us and maybe indirectly. So in our distribution list, I like to track to see how many people are adding and subtracting from our list. So we went up from 900 to 980 between 2016 and 2017. In the right column, some of the outreach activities I tried to categorize into these little lumps. So those workshops and presentations, they may be Chris Upchurch talking to you about automated vehicles, or Keith Line at the chamber talking about scenario planning. So that's kind of what that category is. And then the public regular meetings, those are the TAC and the TPB for the most part. So this last area is our scenario planning initiative. Some of you are involved in that, and thank you for all your help with that. So we launched the public engagement phase of this in October, and between October and probably January, we did about 24 presentations to over 260 people. And the reason I put this age distribution statistic here was to draw your attention to one of the challenges that we've had associated with our public participation plan, and that's our audience diversity. And I'm not specifically talking about just minority diversity or low household income diversity, although I care about that too. We're also talking about geographic location diversity, age, special interests, all of these things that I think most MPOs struggle with when they're trying to engage the public. And the whole point of this is that we can give you all more information, more data, a more holistic picture of what the priorities of the region are when we're out talking to people, and then you use that information to make decisions. So over the last year, I've done a little bit of research and read a bunch of case studies and found this concept of a community advisory committee. And I talked to Phil about this and some of the staff, and we agreed that maybe we should give this a try, bringing citizens in to talk together about what priorities are, maybe generate something that you all could consider or add to the packet of information as we're making decisions. So this won't be the last time you hear about this, but I just wanted to throw it out there as, you know, maybe a thing to talk about or think about until the next time. Oh, and you have this thing, going back to the scenario planning, this initiative, if you remember back in November, some of you were here to do the dot exercise. So this is just to refresh your memory on what, like, the top 5 areas of most concern were for this group. And so I have these sheets for all 24 of the presentations we did, whether it was a neighborhood association or SCAC or whatever. We have sheets, so if you're interested in seeing those, I'd be happy to share them. Can I stand for any questions, suggestions? Tell me to get out.
Yeah, well, thanks, but let's re-clarify the scenario planning. These were votes for the new members. We did you
So
called it a dot exercise?
yeah,
Okay.
the whole idea behind this was Gloria Jeff's project, and Phil's taking lead on it now. But the whole idea was, as we're amping up for our 2019 MTP update, that we start early engaging the community about what their priorities are. And so we started with you all to do this dot exercise. And there was 4 categories: the driving forces, issues, opportunities, and equity. And so we did the same exercise at every group that we went to for the most part, to just see if there was any commonalities among groups, and there were. And so kind of next on the horizon will be creating some scenarios out of what we heard, and then validating it back in the public, and then coming to you with a recommendation. And this will help guide us as we develop the next MTP update, long-range plan for the newbies.
Well, thank you, Tricia. Is there any questions for Tricia?
I guess
Yeah,
I
go
would
ahead,
have one thought. Not that everyone here wouldn't be able to do it pretty easily, awesome that way, but if there were talking points that were maybe presented to us, since we all have councils and other meetings with the public anyway, that would be easy for us to say back to our people in our council meetings and such. That might be helpful for us to also get the word across to our end, instead of it all relying on Wampo and your Facebook and your Twitter pages.
Yeah. I think we could absolutely be responsive to that. With the scenarios that we're developing, we're trying to make them easy, digestible information. They're in a format that's easy to react to. So we could definitely provide support to you in whatever way as you communicate that information back to your home communities, and we can all be singing from the same choir book.
I don't want to make any extra work, but I'm just offering that as a possible suggestion.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Nope. Thank you, Tricia. This was not a voting item, so we will move on to item D. Or when are you giving your report?
Give the rest of mine right now if you want.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. We're going to have Phil give his report.
A couple of personnel changes to tell you about. Some of you know that Gloria Jeff, our principal planner for advanced planning, left to take a job in the Minnesota Department of Transportation, and she's already started her new job. And the other one is Kathy Newby has helped us out since before I was here, has taken a job in her chosen field in counseling, and will be leaving us February 26th. Appreciate all that you've done, Kathy, and thank you very much for all that you've brought to this.
Yeah. Thank you, Kathy. So, well, you'll be missed. We didn't know your chosen field was counseling. You've got some people here you can counsel. 1-800-Kathy.
She's going to write a book over Wampo.
No, she's been very, as the chair, Kathy's been very helpful in keeping information flowing and keeping us on track. So thank you very much, and good luck in your new career. Okay.
Also wanted to update you on the fact that we did receive our comprehensive planning grant monies from KDOT. They were close to 200,000 short because they haven't received money from the Federal Transit Administration yet. But when that comes in, we'll do a supplemental agreement for that to where we get up to speed. But we're watching carefully expenses and income as it comes along until we do get that money. And also, we had kind of a consortium of members of BREG and REAP and Wampo, and we made presentations to the 10-county South Central Kansas area on transportation issues and how that affected. And one of the things we got from all 10 counties, and the chair, Meitzner, and myself represented Wampo on the different presentations, and one of the things that we took out of that was that South Central Kansas needs to have a unified voice in how we make presentations and how we impact not just the South Central region, but the entire state of Kansas. And I think that was very clear that transportation is one of the biggest issues, and it's not just roads and bridges, it's airports, it's all kinds of different things that lead up to transportation being a key part of the economy, as well as moving goods, services, and people. I think that message was extremely clear to us that we should all be in this together.
Phil, I would echo that it's kind of eye-opening. We tend to think of our own area, our own city, our own region, our Wampo. Our Wampo district is Sedgwick County, and it touches Mulvane and Andover, and but to hear the challenges and that the other communities have that are not in an MPO, that they have to do it all kind of on their own or work with KDOT, and it's pretty challenging, especially just trying to get, in the smallest sense, they got a small bridge that a combine can't get over, so they got to take it clear around a section and things like that. So it's they got some real challenges with their infrastructure of roads and bridges and other stuff. So, okay, any questions for Phil? Okay, being none, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Item D is the consent agenda. We have items 1, 2, 3, 4. Any items need to be pulled for discussion? If not, we will entertain a motion to approve consent agenda items 1, 2, 3, 4.
Moved.
Thank you. Thank you, Bert. A second? Okay, thanks, Kelly. Any discussion? There's been a motion and a second to approve consent agenda items. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Being none. Claire, I thought you were raising your hand in opposition. I didn't know. Okay. Next item is the public agenda or public comments. Anybody from the public, if this is the time that you can address the policy body. And if so, please step forward, identify yourself. And if not, we will move on to the next one. Okay, the next item is new business items, and this requires an action. Chris Upchurch will update us on the MAP 21 and MOVE 2040 safety performance measures. Chris, please respect our new participants. If we throw out acronyms like I just did, feel free to say what they are.
Will do.
Okay, thank you.
Chris Upchurch, Wampo staff. Here today to talk to you about our safety performance measures. This is part of our ongoing process of performance-based planning. And just a reminder, that's the process where we measure performance based on our goals that we've chosen and use the results of those measurements to inform our future planning decisions. So there are two sources for all of our performance measures. There's some federal performance measures. Those originally come from federal legislation, the MAP 21, or Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century Act, as codified in federal regulations from the Department of Transportation. Then there's also a series of performance measures that we adopted in our long-range plan, MOVE 2040, which we adopted back in 2015, areas that we felt are important to us here locally. And thus far, most of the performance measures that I've brought before this body have fallen into one or the other of these categories. For safety, though, they actually straddle both of these. There are some federal requirements and some local performance measures that we've adopted here in Wampo. So these federal performance measures are the 5 listed here: the number of fatalities, the fatality rate, number of serious injuries, serious injury rate, and the number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. Then our local Move 2040 performance measures, you can see here we have 11 of them. The first 4 are the same as those federal performance measures. They're essentially duplicates. But then there are these other 7 areas where we go into a little more detail than the minimum that the federal government lays out. So we're looking at fatalities for bicycles and pedestrians, fatalities at railroad grade crossings, younger and older drivers, fatalities involving alcohol and involving commercial trucks. So just areas where we chose in Move 2040 to get a little more detail, to delve a little more deeply than what the minimum federal requirement is. So part of the process of performance-based planning, we want to set targets for these performance measures. It's a requirement for the federal measures, and it's good practice for our local Move 2040 measures. Targets help give us a reference point, tell us if we're on track for where we want to be going, where we were expecting to go, or not. And there are 3 ways we can set these targets. The most common way is to set the targets based on the current trends. So to look at the existing data and say, based on what's happened in the past, this is where we think the trend is going to be in the future. We can also set targets expecting to change current trends. Maybe we're making a big investment that we think will bend the curve, will change what will happen in the future. For example, if you're looking at pavement condition and it's been getting worse, but we're investing a bunch of money in pavement rehabilitation projects, then maybe we would not expect it to get worse in the future because of that investment. And finally, there is the idea of aspirational targets, which are common in the safety area. Things like Vision Zero, saying the only acceptable number of fatalities is 0. In this case, though, the federal government has said pretty strongly that they do not want to see aspirational targets for this. They want actual hard numbers that reflect what we expect will happen when it comes to safety. Setting targets based on changing those trends through investments probably doesn't really apply to us in terms of safety, because we did not choose to invest a bunch of money in safety-specific projects in Move 2040. Part of the reason we did that is back when we were doing Move 2040, it looked like we were in a pretty good condition safety-wise, particularly for fatalities. As you'll see in a few minutes here, that's no longer the case, but we did not choose to make big investments in safety in Move 2040, and we aren't going to be spending a bunch of money specifically in that area in the next few years. So these targets that I'm going to recommend, and some of them are going to be a little hard to stomach when we get to these, especially for fatalities, are going to be based on our current trends. They're going to be what we think is most likely the trends are going to be in the next few years. So all of these performance measures, we're looking at a 5-year rolling average, and we do that because safety data tends to jump up and down a little bit at random. Looking at 5 years rather than just 1 helps smooth things out, helps you see the underlying trend apart from the year-to-year noise. So 5-year rolling average, pretty simple. You look at 5 years, add them up, divide by 5. That's your average per year. Now, what makes this a little different is that we are setting targets for 2018. That's what the federal government is asking of us, and just for consistency, we're doing the same thing with our local performance measures. So for 2018, we look at that 5-year rolling average. 5 years will be 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018. However, we already have data up through 2016. We don't have any 2017 data yet, still waiting for KDOT to get done compiling that. But we know up through 2016, so we already know the first 3 years of that 5-year average. So for a couple of these performance measures, in addition to talking about the long-term trend, you'll also hear me talk about specifically what the 2014 through 2016 numbers look like. So here is our first performance measure, the number of fatalities, and as you can see from the chart there, they are increasing. Just to give a little of the background on this, as with many places around the country and the country as a whole, we saw a decrease in fatalities and in most other types of crashes during the recession. Saw the fatalities go down. And that was the data we were looking at when we did Move 2040, when we thought we were in a pretty good position. Unfortunately, every year since 2011, the number of fatalities in the Wampo region has gone up. So this is a long-term sustained increase, and that's what you see at on the right side of the graph there.
Do you see that same trend nationwide?
Yes, the timing shifts a little bit, but there have been, for the state and for the nation as a whole, this upswing in fatalities as the economy has gotten better.
So then what makes us think that we can somehow change that trend by what we're doing here if we're not the one that caused it to begin with?
Well, like I said, we're setting these targets based on what the trends are. So I'm going to recommend, I do not see us changing this, certainly not in time for 2018. You know, there are things, if during the next MTP we decide that safety is a higher priority when we update the long-range plan over the next 2 years. There are things we can spend money on. We can solicit and fund safety-specific projects. You can do education and outreach stuff. There are ways to affect these numbers through spending. We're just not doing any of those at the moment.
I think that's a leap there. I mean, I guess the increase is somehow related to a better economy or something, or more people doing more road miles. I guess we got to be careful how we spend money in the name of safety to make sure we're not just doing it because the feds tell us to, and then we're spending money on, I mean, you know, there's got to be a cause and effect there.
Yeah, I agree, and that's part of the process of going through updating the MTP is for us and for you as the policy body to consider, you know, where do we want to invest our money? Do we want to invest them in trying to affect the safety statistics? Do we want to spend it in other areas? That's fundamentally part of the transportation planning process.
Got to look, where are these fatalities happening? Are they happening in areas that would be considered regionally significant projects that we could even have an effect on? Or are they just inside the cities? And I would argue a lot of the stuff that we do, even though we don't call it safety, but when you improve a road or you improve the North Junction, for heaven's sakes, that's a safety issue, regardless of whether you're saying it's not education, but it affects safety. So.
Yeah, there are certainly collateral safety benefits to a lot of other projects. I was just saying we did not choose projects specifically for their safety benefits for the most part when we were developing Move 2040. So, based on the long-term trend, we would expect about 50 fatalities in the Wampo region during the 5-year period. However, if you look at those first 3 years, the 2014, 2015, 2016, we're already above that, up at 53.3 fatalities. So because of that, the recommended target is no more than 54 fatalities per year over the 5-year average period. So moving on to fatality rate, news is a little better here. Essentially for fatality rate, what we're looking at is how many fatalities do we see per mile of travel. So this is the number of fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. And you can see the same sort of pattern there. It does look a little better in this graph because we are traveling more. So the current peak is not quite so high compared to the pre-recession peak. But there still is this increase in these recent years. So again, based on the longer term data, we would expect about 1.06 fatalities per 100 million VMT, but we're already above that for 2014 through 2016, 1.13 fatalities. And that is what the recommended target is 1.13 per 100 million VMT.
Are those variances statistically significant? Has anyone evaluated that?
Yeah, they are.
Can you show me the data that says that, the report that says that and evaluates that?
Yeah, I can get you the data on that. So some good news for a change here. Serious injuries has been declining, and it's been declining over a long period of time. We've seen it all the way back since 2008, long and consistent declines in the number of serious injuries. So you can see if you look on the left side of the graph there, it may be a little small for some of you towards the back of the room, but we were well over 200 serious injuries in the Wampo region back in 2008 to 2012. We are expecting under 140 in the 5-year period that we're going to be looking at 2014 through 2018. So that really is a very substantial improvement. So recommended target here is 138, no more than 138 serious injuries per year for that 5-year period. Serious injury rate, same sort of thing. We were up above 5 per 100 million VMT back in 2008 to 2012. Now we're down. The forecast is for us to be below 3. So again, a very significant improvement. And recommended target is 2.85 per 100 million VMT.
Chris, are all these numbers just for the Wampo or the regionally significant road?
No, they're for everything in the Wampo region. Regionally significant, federal system, state system, local roads. And that is based on the way the federal government wrote the federal performance measures is the state has to look at all fatalities within the state of Kansas, regardless of whose roads they're on, and the MPO has to look at all fatalities within the MPO region, regardless of whose roads they're on.
Richard's, probably concerns. First of all, obviously, great info, except it's not, because we don't know a million factors that would have went in, whether it's, the economy's improved, are there specific locations where the fatalities have dramatically increased or not? We have no idea based on this. Or were they caused by more because of alcohol or not? Or is it in areas where we're doing all the construction? I mean, there's so many factors in this that, again, this is probably good overview info, but unless we dive into it, I don't see how it would be almost useful.
Yeah. We'll get to the alcohol question in a second here. As for those others, I definitely agree, and that's sort of the next step in an analysis like this, is to start to do some of that detailed geographic and circumstances breakdown.
We're gonna do that today. We're gonna get.
Not going to be doing that today.
Okay, good.
I would anticipate that if we hear from you guys and from our public engagement that safety is a priority based on this sort of data, that would be part of the process for the next MTP, is to break that down into a much more detailed look at these specific areas. Where are the accidents? What sort of accidents? That sort of thing.
I would argue we need to do that first. I mean, I understand you're doing it because the Fed said and the states, but I think this is a flawed approach. I mean, because you're saying we have to based upon whatever happens regardless of where they're at. But we don't control things that happen where they're at. We ought to be able to see what the rate is on the things that we control and then see if there's anything to do. So while you probably can't do anything about that today, but I would encourage us to send it back up and say, this doesn't make sense. I mean, I understand their intent, but
Interject just from my own background of setting targets. What I understand we've done here is we've captured the history, which is the first step in setting a target. And then once that baseline is set, as we move forward, whatever the variance is off of the target we've set, which in most cases is your best guess, unless you have some real data. And then as that is achieved, if it's underperforming what you want, there's going to be a reason why, and that's where the data dump goes into, so we can understand what we have to fix and whether that needs financial support, educational support, whatever. And if it's better than we expected, you still have to pay attention to it, and why are we getting the gain so we can make advantage of it. So this is just setting the baselines. It'll be after the first year you could look at our actual performance before they would have to really attack what caused it to change. And that's
Based on the number, I mean, the single question of, is this even Wampo roads or not, or regionals? The answer is no. We wouldn't be able to affect in this body that I would say at all.
I thought he just said it's all roads within the Wampo.
Yeah, all
area.
roads, including every single road in Wichita, not just the
Well,
roads that
Wampo
are
includes
part
the
of.
city. Wampo includes that.
yeah, but we can't
geographic area.
affect changes to those roads. That's
Our
what we're
dollars
saying.
do not go to Broadway and Wichita. Our roads go to the regionally significant roads.
But the responsibility of this governing body, and we've had this conversation many times, how do you affect the entire governing body traffic footprint? And safety is one of those. It may not be, when you do the deep dive, that all of this turns out to be on Broadway. Then the city has information that they can take and use. But this governing body has a responsibility, I believe, to look over the umbrella.
I think as an individual city and county and et cetera, of course we do. And maybe even have the discussion overall. But when it comes to how it's going to affect our decision making for the specific roads that Wampo is focused on, I don't know if it's as much of a a thing as what it would be if we threw all that away and said, okay, well, we're going to do every city and every road and focus on safety. I guess I don't
Well,
see
we
that
did talk
connection.
last year when we approved project that every project approval ought to have a safety element.
Agree. Yeah.
Then your question is going to be, well, where's the safety information if we're trying to apply a safety element to a project? It's going to come out of data.
I agree with that as well, but I'm just saying this data is not that data. This data is every single road and every single entity here. If you're talking about trying to affect our roads that we're responsible for in this body, then it should be paired out, and only what is other roads that we can affect directly in this body should be part of this data. It's my opinion. I mean, there's a lot of us here. So.
How that
Well,
data
Troy,
is
you're,
dividable.
yeah, if I got this right, Bert, I think you do a great comments, and Troy, I understand what you're saying, but in this just this map 21 reporting this overall, even if it's open intersections in a neighborhood that had a fatality, it's just part of the data that we're required to submit as a federal requirement as our MPO region. And Rick, do you have any comment on this about if I'm starting to engage our federal guy here?
Yeah, and I'm not sure how to engage other than the fact that, you know, the requirements are the
Yeah,
requirements.
I think that's what it is. It's maybe not, we may not like the details or not have the details of the data. It may be roads and bridges that we have no jurisdiction over, but it's part of the reporting of the Wampo region.
Okay, well then that's great. We have to do it. We have to do it. But going back to again Richard's thought and mine too would be when we get to the point of making decisions, realize that this isn't necessarily an apples to apples. It's not an apples to apples. It's an apple.
I think this provides a larger regional context for all of us to get a big 30,000 foot altitude picture of what's going on. As a decision-making body, we can only make decisions within this body's purview, as each of us as a representative of other bodies can make only decisions within those purviews. But I do appreciate being able to see the bigger picture before we get down to the nitty-gritty of what Wampo can and will decide to do moving forward.
I add one more thing.
Sure. Bert.
The only, I think where this body would really need to be concerned, and it goes back to your point, I think, for every target, there has to be some sort of a consequence, the reason they put it in place. Where we would really need to be concerned is if data is created, targets are set, and we fail to meet the target, and then what comes with that is a consequence. Well, if you're not meeting this target, you lose a certain amount of funding. Then it's really going to have an impact as to how the targets will be used down the road is what we really need to understand. When we set targets or anything, that's great to set the target and have just an intuitive look at it. But if it starts to affect funding because your injury rate is such that you set yourself and you're failing to meet it, so that's going to have an impact on funding, then we really need to.
And that was going to be my next question, because if we set targets based on things that we can't control, we may not be able to affect the change that we want to. I respect the data, but then the next question is, if we don't meet these targets, what are the consequences, if any? Are we going to lose funding? Or are we held harmless or?
Yeah, for MPOs, there is no consequence for hitting your target or not. There are some consequences at the state level for the state's choice of targets. They're fairly minor, but there are consequences there. But the regulations as they now stand do not have any consequences for the MPO in terms of funding or our flexibility or anything like that.
True, but I think getting back to the point from Tim Johnson, and I think the intent of this especially is in the setting of the targets, you are getting a better sense of the regional needs, and it's a sieve, it's a marker, it's a way of getting a sense of where do we stand on safety and pavements and bridges. It does not take away from the decision-making role of the MPO or how you all identify needs. It's meant to be, at this point, providing information that assists in the process. So.
And I will point out, we are sort of stuck with the way the federal targets have been defined. On the local side, we do have flexibility. We're the ones who established these targets, and when we adopted Move 2040, we chose to, write these performance measures in a way that they applied to the entire Wampo region. Part of the performance-based planning process is when we do the feedback, when we take this data and use it to inform future planning. That includes, if we feel it warranted changing what our performance measures are. So I've got a note down here for the next MTP that there's been at least some desire by this policy body to focus Wampo targets on, I think, regionally significant roads would be a good way to put what Richard and Troy were talking about. And we'll, as staff, certainly bring that up as part of the process for the next MTP. All right, so number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. And by non-motorized, in this case, we basically mean pedestrians and bicyclists. Here you do see the same sort of pattern we had with the fatality rate. There was a large dip during the recession, and it has risen since then. In this case, though, it stayed low for a bit longer. Our fatality rate started going up after 2011. Here we stayed low until 2014. So we really only have 2 years of an uptick for the non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries versus the much longer trend for fatalities. So while the graph looks like this, it's not quite as definite as the fatality data. So the average for those last 3 years, and again, 2014 was a pretty good year. 2015 and 2016, it was substantially higher. But if you average those 3 years, it was 31 fatalities and serious injuries for non-motorized road users. And so the recommended target for this is set at 30. Bicycle fatalities, as you can see, we have a pretty pronounced upward trend here. However, the absolute numbers are still quite low. From 2008 till 2016, we never had more than 2 bicycle fatalities in any single year. And many years we had only 1 or didn't have any. So while there's an upward trend, the absolute numbers are still quite low. So based on that trend, we would expect about 1.6 bicycle fatalities, and the recommended target is 2. Pedestrian fatalities, we're seeing an upward trend here. Sorry, let me get to my notes here. Now, pedestrian fatalities, we're seeing an upward trend somewhat. We'd expect about 7.1 based on the trend, and the recommended target is 7. Rail grade crossing fatalities, this is one where there really is no trend. We have either had no rail grade crossing fatalities or 1 in each year, and it just tends to basically randomly bounce between those two. There's no real distinct upward or downward trend. So the recommended is no more than 1 rail grade crossing fatality. Drivers under age 21, this is one where even the smoothing effect of the 5-year rolling average can't hide how noisy this data is. It goes up and down. We had a maximum of 10 drivers under age 21 involved in fatalities. In some years, we had a minimum of 2, and there's no real pattern to seeing is it going up or down over that time. So based on the data, we'd expect about 5.3. So the recommended target is no more than 5. Now at the other end of the age spectrum, drivers over age 75, we are seeing an upward trend, probably related to our aging population. We're seeing more of these older drivers on the road, so there's more opportunity for them to get involved with accidents. Based on this data, we'd expect about 4.4, and so the recommended target is no more than 4. Another piece of good news here, we have seen a long and fairly sustained decline in alcohol-related fatalities. You can see back in the first 5 years of this, we were up near 16 per year, and based on the long-term trend, we'd expect 7.7. So we have basically cut our number of if the trend continues, we will have cut our number of alcohol-related fatalities in half. So that is, very good news. So based on this, the recommended target is no more than 8 per year. And finally, crashes involving trucks. This is an instance where the 5-year rolling average is kind of concealing something important. We do have an upward trend, but a lot of that is driven by a really big spike in 2013. We had 10 fatalities and crashes involving trucks that year. Most other years were closer to 5. So there was just this real big 1-year spike. If you ignore that 1-year spike, there is a slight upward trend, but not by much. The other factor here is there has been a change in federal regulations requiring electronic logbooks for truck drivers, which is expected will decrease fatigued driving. That's a major cause of crashes among commercial truckers. So that is a case where we can expect perhaps some change in the trend beyond what we're seeing currently. So John Prather on the TAC actually suggested to change this target, and the TAC endorsed that, setting the target at no more than 4 fatalities involving trucks for the 2018 target.
Being the new person, so trucks, this is just commercial?
Yes, this is commercial trucks,
Over the-
so large semis and straight trucks. So, options for the policy body: approve the proposed targets, not approve them, or approve them with specific changes. Regarding the not approve them one, we do have a federal deadline. They've asked that we adopt targets for those 5 federal performance measures this month.
Yeah, Tom?
I'd like to make a comment. TAC did make a couple adjustments in that. They were incorporated today, and with those adjustments, the TAC recommended this be accepted as a kickoff.
And in this,
Pardon?
the TAC recommendations are in this?
Yes.
Right.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Good, I'm glad that, thanks for reviewing that.
I would make a motion that we accept this.
Okay. Tom, thanks for the motion. Dan, thanks for the second. Is any other discussion? There's motion and a second on the floor. Being no discussion.
I continue,
Richard.
this is problematic. We're talking about blood alcohol things, truck with, the logs of this, that, and another. I see this taking us down a road. For now, it has no consequence. I actually think most of the stuff is why we have states and counties and cities. These should be at the state level, and I'm concerned that we're gonna divert resources away from things that we can do and do well, to do something that we may not do as well and is better suited in another venue. So that's my feedback again.
Okay.
I
So,
have one question as well.
yeah, Jim.
So the various descriptions of things you just went through, is that duplicative? Was the first 4, you talked about railway crossings and you talked about bicycles and DUIs, and so how much, is there any type of overlapping numbers here? Or is this all unique and separate numbers?
Okay, so if I understand what you're asking, is there sort of double counting? Is something
Yes.
that was in category A also counted under category B?
Right.
So obviously, for the number of fatalities and fatality rate, that also encompasses, pedestrian fatalities and bicycle fatalities and that sort of thing. So a bicycle fatality would be counted both under the bicycle fatality measure and in the total of fatalities. Other than that, the other obvious overlap is we have the 2 Wampo pedestrian and bicycle measures. And then there is the federal measure that includes all non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. So those would be the ones I think would necessarily overlap. Now, you could have a situation where you have a driver who is under 21 and intoxicated
Right.
and have a fatality at a grade crossing. But for the ones that are kind of inherently overlapping, I think what I just told you covers those.
Well, just I guess a follow-up question, has anybody kind of analyzed this holistically? In other words, what's the total number of fatalities based on all the different criteria for the Wampo region?
Well, yeah, the total number of fatalities would be under that first
Okay, that very
category.
first
So
target,
that,
okay.
this includes all fatalities,
That very helpful.
under 21, over 75, grade crossings, everything.
It helps me very much. Thank you so much.
And again, are all those measured categories, are those mandated or are the ones that we've just picked?
These 5 are the federally mandated ones. These are the ones that were adopted as part of Move 2040 that we chose here
We added
locally.
on to them.
There seems to be a little inconsistency in a couple of the data points, in that you're saying over the long term, we've had a decrease in serious injuries, but we've had an increase in fatalities. That doesn't seem to be consistent. Do you have any explanation for that?
Well, I'm moving into speculation here versus hard knowledge. My speculation is the decrease in serious injuries is probably related to changes in automobile design, more airbags and safety systems, that sort of thing. I am a little surprised that those improvements didn't carry over into fatalities, and it may just be things like higher vehicle speeds or that sort of thing, or overcoming the improvements in automobile safety technology. But again, that is stepping over the line into speculation there.
So nobody's had the opportunity to actually try to see what might be driving that inconsistency?
Not yet.
Thank you.
Okay, good discussion. Obviously, there's a feeling that we'd like to have a little more drill down on some of these measurements, but it's a little out of our hands right now. So there's been a motion and a second on the floor to approve the performance targets as proposed. So any other discussion? Being none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? 3. Carl, did you oppose also? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. 2. Well, that's all right. It's a free country.
You know, it's been
Okay,
voted on,
Bert,
but
yeah.
I think the important thing that this governing body has to realize is the statement that they have no consequence today, 3 years from today, when this data starts to prove itself out, could back us into a serious corner. And I think the governing body just needs to realize the government would not put a performance measure in place if at some point in the future it doesn't intend to hold you accountable for how you do that. And as far as detracting funds, it could be very serious for us if we have to put a certain percentage of the funds available to us to offset safety targets. So it's just something that right now you say there's nothing, I don't know of any organization that's ever put a target in place and said, but it means nothing to us.
Similar like falling in and out of attainment.
That's
Exactly
why,
right.
that's why
Right.
another consideration or thought may be, and I almost made a substitute motion, is to only adopt the ones that were mandated to. Let's not create any more. I understand all those things are
Good
important.
consideration.
You know, but
Yeah.
let's not create more data points that they could come back and, especially the ones that get some of those got very specific and, as you said, very low numbers. So that any variation in raw numbers could really make a difference and would be more difficult, I think, to, they could be problematic, just something to think as we go forward.
And I would say, I mean, I voted no because of exactly what Bert said, which is that at some point we're going to be held accountable for this. And what we've just done was to hold ourselves accountable for a whole bunch of data points, most of the data points that we have absolutely no control over in this body. But now we're responsible for it, and potentially it could hurt us with federal funding. That's what Bert just said. So maybe it's the requirement that we do it this way for now, per the federal government. I'm not absolutely sure that's accurate. But for sure, if we're going to make a performance target that we have to meet, why in the world would we vote to do it for things that we could never meet?
Yep.
You translating into German or something? It sounded.
I understand German better.
And that's all. That's why I voted it down this time.
Yeah, thanks. Great explanation. Good comments. I think it's duly noted for going forward. Okay, moving on to the next item, committee partnership status reports. The committee updates, there's a couple of them. Executive committee, we did meet last month. We reviewed with the director. We actually reviewed the director's position kind of going forward. It's been a little bit of a temporary phase, but we're working on that and working towards a more permanency there. If you recall, the policy body authorized the executive committee to work directly with the director, meaning Phil. We also discussed his plans with an org chart, which with the absence of Gloria, we talked about filling that position, the timing that it goes with that, but there is some consulting companies in town that can fulfill that role at maybe a reduced price and give us more hours and more and some expertise while we try to fill that position. So we're heading that way. And then, of course, we talked about the workshop that we just had and the impact of 33 months return on investment, including ROI and future stuff, things like that. So that was the extent of the executive committee lunch, unless I missed something. Did I miss anything? Okay. Any questions about that? Okay, being none, the TAC committee, Transportation Advisory Committee, also Tom Jones, please.
Back, we did the MAP 21 and the MOVE 2040 performance measures, made the recommendation to this group. Not all of us were in agreement with that either, but it's something we brought forward. So the other thing we looked at was Amendment 4 on the TIP. Made the recommendation to bring that forward. That was on the consent agenda. One of the concerns I got coming up, and I don't know, maybe Federal Highways can tell us a little bit, or I got in on the end of Jeff's conversation. We're talking about what we're going to do out in year 4 of current plan, out 36 months out. What's funding going to look like? Have you heard anything? They're starting to talk about more local match. And I'm wondering if our 80-20, if we were going to have $12 million to play with in 3 years.
Okay, thanks. Well, as it currently stands, we're under the FAST Act. So, for example, for Kansas, there's a gradual bump up of federal funding through the remaining 2 years. But 4 years out, I don't have an answer for you on what our funding scenario would be. There would need to be a reauthorization of federal legislation. And as many of you folks here who've been in this process, that's the opportune time to determine what our priorities. For example, we just had a good discussion about performance measures. I mean, and we started having performance measures in MAP 21, more of a expounding of that in the most recent legislation. So long-winded answer, I don't have a gauge for you. In the TIP process, the first 2 years are those prioritized lists. Those are the ones that are really the focus, and where we look at, is there reasonably available funding? Is there commitment? And beyond that, it becomes more of the list of priorities that can then be moved forward, assuming that conditions are good for that to happen. So that's, I don't know.
I was just going to say, I think it's the same story at the state level as well. I mean, we're doing our best right now to complete the T-Works program, and based on what we're seeing in Senate Bill 285, there could be a conversation starting shortly about the next possible program. So I think funding is very uncertain at the state as well. I think we're very hopeful, but I think there's just a lot of question marks right now.
And if we have to fund more, and especially if KDOT's got to come up with more funding, it's going to be an issue.
The comment I would make is we have a new administration for the federal government in place. It's only the first year. They will be a key, with our FAST Act expiring, they will be the proponents of the next bill. So, and I know we have an infrastructure package out there that might be a glimpse of some of the priorities that might go into the next piece of legislation. Also now have a new governor. So lots to come.
Thank you.
Sounds like it's kind of unknown right now.
So I was just trying to find out if somebody heard something and they
Right.
haven't.
So, well, that goes into the next part is the updates from KDOT and from Rick, from the federal. Is that your presentation? You got additional information that you want to share as your
I
report
think
does?
Mike's up first, so
Okay.
I'm happy to go after.
Mike?
I cede my time to the federal government. It wouldn't be the first time. So I've only got a couple things to talk about real quick. So we're monitoring a number of bills, working through the State House right now. I thought I'd bring up two of them here today. The first one is Senate Bill 285, which would establish a joint legislative transportation task force to study Kansas transportation system. Basically, this task force would look at the current system, future needs, expenditures, funding opportunities, things of that nature. I'm happy to talk more about it after the meeting. I don't want to drone on about the different bullet points in the narrative. What we're seeing so far coming out of the Senate would include representation on the task force from state, county, and city elected officials, industry, public transit, rail, as well as economic development folks. So that's gone through the Senate. I believe it's going to be acted upon shortly, then it goes to the House. So there'll probably be some changes once it goes to the House, and we're just continuing to monitor that. In addition to that, on the House side, House Bill 2605 deals with truck platooning, which is kind of exciting. That would be a situation where a platoon, right, a series of semi-trucks could travel in an organized manner with electronically controlled speeds, so their following distance would theoretically be much closer. It's like NASCAR, right? Drafting, there'd be fuel savings, there'd be economies, things like that. So the industry is very interested in that type of legislation here in Kansas. My understanding is that there's a hearing on this bill on Thursday, and what we're hearing is it will be worked this session. So there could be something actually happening in terms of truck platooning in Kansas here shortly.
Question. Of the task force that you said there, should this body be looking at maybe recommending people to those positions that they may be setting up?
Yeah, I think any of the urban areas here in Kansas should be evaluating what membership could look like. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the bill's not sponsored by KDOT, but I think that's prudent.
Was that hearing that when they had a lot of people, they had a Senate hearing on that, and I happened to be there for something else, and tremendous amount of support for for entities and participants from all over the state and industries, and I don't think nobody was speaking against it. As a matter of fact, Jerry Younger, a former, he was referred to a lot. It's kind of a continuation of, it's another round or a new version of the T-Works, and so it'll maybe just how much money, how much time, what's the reach? I think T-Works was what, $1 million a county or $10 million a county, something like that. I can't remember.
The $8 million promise, yeah.
$8 million,
8 million per county.
So just kind of, but put together by industry and concrete roads, and then the representative talked about. It's pretty interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Rick, how is the federal government doing?
Oh, I don't know. Been watching the news lately? Kind of go from CR to CR. So,
Well, I know the CR also impacts what we were talking about earlier. I mean,
Well,
until you have a 2-year budget.
yeah, and I kind of wanted to kind of expound on that and
Okay.
kind of hopefully assuage some nervousness, at least for one program, and not so assuage the other. So for the federal highway side, I know that we've been going from CR to CR, and now we're looking at March 19th. The good news is that for federal highways, because we have the FAST Act and we are funded through the federal gas tax, we have what is called contract authority. So we are not interrupted. So, and through the life of the bill, so our money keeps flowing. So literally, KDOT can continue to submit bills, and they're they're the ombudsman for all of the MPOs. So on the federal highway side, smooth, pretty much smooth sailing, no hiccups. The FTA side, that's another story. So for FTA grants, there is an issue with them. They, they will, if we have another hiccup with a CR and another shutdown, until, their funding is impacted. Another DOT agency that's not impacted is Federal Motor Carrier. They're also covered by contract authority. So, so it's a little bit of a mishmash. I will say the last CR, the last shutdown, about 2/3 of DOT was going to be furloughed, but Federal Highways was not, and a couple of other agencies. So, hopefully we will. We did have some good action last week, but hopefully for the other modes, and because you all are very much dependent also on FTA funding, we will see no hiccups going forward after March 19th. So stay tuned. Having a couple of other items wanted to update, and I also wanted to kind of do a walkthrough, time permitting, for a few minutes on the infrastructure package that was released, if that works. So personnel changes in our office. Our program development team leader, John Knowles, accepted a position in our Central Federal Lands office in Denver. So this is Paul Foundukas' supervisor. We have reorganized our office. We have gone from 3 teams down to 2, so that the planning function that primarily would work with Wampo, that's going to be part of our finance and program development team. Paul will continue in his new role. That team, Paul's team leader is actually our finance manager, Matt McDonald. So Matt brings a ton of experience in finance, and we're going to be bringing him up to speed on the planning side. So at some point, I'll be bringing Matt down with me so that you all have a chance to meet with him. On the FTA side, I believe most folks are aware that Mark Bechtel, who had been Daniel Nagoyan's supervisor, was promoted. He's now the deputy regional administrator, so they're going through a little bit of reorganization as well. We will be hiring 2 new federal highway people, one an environmental coordinator, and another person that will be helping with statewide policies and programs. So good discussion earlier. Just a comment on the performance measures and targets. I know that it's the FAST Act. The FAST Act is setting up targets, and we're sort of inching our way towards where do we go from here. And I think getting back to the question that was raised earlier, it's really going to be a big discussion in the next act. Do we go forward with possibly accountability with this or not? And I think a big indicator that will be happening in 2 years is how well states and MPOs have been developing their performance measures and targets, and are they useful? So I think there'll be a lot of intake and feedback. I'm sure AASHTO and NARC and AMPO will all be weighing in. So, lots to come on that. Asset management plan for Kansas, good development of that effort. We're looking to receive their draft document by the middle of April, before the deadline we have in statute. And I know that Dave Schwartz and Mike, I'm sure as well, has been talking with you all and getting your input and feedback as that's been moving forward. So now, the big news, and I understand there was some talk about this before I got here. So the infrastructure package that there were a couple of calls yesterday and some rollouts of some brief information, but a lot more to come. The first thing I will say is that what has been presented is a proposal. There has to be vetting through Congress, and how we go forward, we'll see what happens. I know that our administration has said there's been a lot of bipartisan discussion happening, so I know this package has been long awaited by folks, and especially given the fact that Kansas has a high rural component, there's a lot of excitement about the potential. So I'm just going to briefly walk through this. Basically what we're looking at is using federal dollars to leverage state and local funding to advance programs. It's not completely that way, but that's a big focus of what we're talking about. $200 billion in federal funds. The intent is to spur 1.5 trillion in infrastructure investments with our partners, states, locals, tribal governments, private sector. A big focus as well on decision-making being brought further down to the local level. And part of that's really going to be focused in on the environmental side, permitting, working with regulatory agencies. I will tell you, within the federal government, there's a big effort going on between our agency, DOT, Department of the Interior, Army Corps. There is a task force looking at how do we better streamline our efforts so that we can get towards a one-stop shopping. So in other words, if someone comes in for a permit, for a 404 permit or NIMS permit, which is National Fish and Wildlife, National Marine Fisheries, excuse me, that our ideal aim would be to get to the point where there's one request and we work together internally to make that happen. So it's in the works. There's a lot of discussion about that. Within the proposal, I'll walk through a couple things I think that might be of interest. 20 billion is proposed to be dedicated to a transformative projects program that really similar to our Federal Highway Everyday Counts program, which looks at innovation, promoting that. This would be a focused area on looking for positive projects that also that attach private sector investment. Streamlining permitting, I talked a bit about that. The projects that are moved forward in, that's going to be one of the key indicators we're going to be looking at. Just looking here for a second. Rural programs, approximately 50 billion is going to be allocated for this, and about 40 billion of that is going to be just directly allocated to states, giving them the flexibility to work with you all and other communities as to how we move forward. Another 10 billion of that is going to be more of a performance grant-based basis on the rural side. And then, one of the other big focus areas is to increase local involvement, state involvement as to how we, focus these funds. And another part of this is going to be on workforce hiring, encouraging, more folks getting into the trades of construction and transportation, providing grants to states and localities. So, again, this is all in the idea box that's in this package, and now it gets vetted again by Congress and by constituents and interest groups. So I will say that especially for middle America states, that whole rural focus, especially for Kansas, I know there was a lot of trepidation about, and there was a lot of talk about P3s, and not that P3s won't be in there, but I know that folks were a bit concerned about, let's say you put a P3 in western Kansas, is anybody going to pay a toll? Is that really something that's doable? So I think one of the good news items is in this 50 billion package, the 40 billion that's going to go directly to the states. That's not going to be part of it. So it's going to be much more of a needs-based and working with KDOT and working with you all as to how that moves forward. The other parts of it, though, there will be looking for participation and funding and opportunities. So I don't know, I'm trying to, and then again, a big part of this too, especially on the side that's not the direct allocation, will be presenting and submitting projects that look to streamline, in other words, in past efforts that we've had like ARA, et cetera, shovel-ready projects, as we call them, were the ones that would receive the priority. I know there's a lot of discussion about that. That's really the projects that have the least amount of environmental NEPA work to do will be seen more favorably, and those projects that already have very strong commitments from local governments to provide funding or with private industries. So, but this is a proposal, more to come, but that's just basically a snapshot. There's going to be a lot more information coming out. Just as an example, I literally just had a call on this at 3 o'clock yesterday. I know that I talked to Catherine Patrick, State Transportation Engineer. They had a call yesterday with the White House at 1. We're waiting on receiving some one-pagers and more detailed info, and so more to come. But any questions? I know that's a lot I threw at you. So.
Quick question. Do you have a definition of rural?
That would be based on the U.S. Census designations of rural. Now, states that are primarily rural, for example, based on census areas, urbanized areas versus rural areas, I'm sure that that will be a big part of how they determine that allocation. So, for example, the Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, this whole spine in the center, pretty good chance that we're probably going to see some favorable funding. Now, again, this is a proposal. It's not done. So, other questions, comments?
Rick, thanks. We appreciate you being here. It's very valuable to have you bring in some.
My apologies for being late. So.
No, that's right. And yeah, you did miss, Mayor Longwell was there in there, so he shared his perspective with it. So, but it seems like it's a fast-moving world with the Fed world and transportation infrastructure. So, your contribution and your knowledge is really appreciated.
And if in March, if I have a lot more, I should have a lot more information. I'll plan to come down and provide more of a walkthrough. So.
You didn't have, this happened Monday. You didn't have this already by now?
Actually, yeah, that's right.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
I have one comment. I want to thank him for coming down and going to it. He drove all the way down here and all the way back, for, a half hour? And that, need to get that out, that he did show up for that.
Well, I appreciate it, but, part of my commitment of being here is you all are the largest MPO in we have Mark, but you all are in Kansas are the largest MPO, and you have a large area, and from my perspective, you have a lot of issues that you're wrestling with, and, I want to, and I know FTA feels the same way, we want to provide, the support that we can, so.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom, for bringing up. Any other business or comments? Okay, being none, we are adjourned. Thank you again, new people, for being here.